Hey, how are you?
Yeah. I
How are
invited him to
you?
come along because he wanted to say hi. So, Luca, do you want to come stand over near me?
Okay.
Thanks. And then, Zach, that's a good spot for you to be because people tend to congregate around the couches or sit on the couches, which is
Okay.
which is kind of ironic. Well, welcome, Zach. This is fantastic that you can join us. We have 22 people already
Yeah.
arrived. There was now almost 70 people accepted the invitation. The most we've had is 30. So let's see how many we get today. Mike is recording this conversation, aren't you,
Cool.
Mike?
That is true.
Cool, cool. And we try to encourage everyone not to prepare. So I hope you haven't prepared, Zach.
I have not prepared.
Yay! We wanted to make this, and the reason for that is because we really want everyone to join in the discussion. The purpose of this getting together is to together understand the possibilities of spatial computing, and also some of the things that we need to be really aware of and design for a better future, not mess up our world. So I also prefer to let you introduce yourselves, but introduce yourself because you hosts do a much better job than me. But I wanted to just sort of say how that we have known each other for a little while. I reached out to Zach on an artist collaboration project, and then Zach came into Adobe on an artist in residency program with Momo, his partner, and just have several prints of his work around our house. And we've known each other for a while, and I've always admired your work. One other reason I have enjoyed chatting to you is that you have thoughts about how spatial computing, particularly AR, is the possibilities and what's good about it and how to design well for it. And you've been playing in this area for a very long time as an artist and have some really some good thoughts around that. So I'm now just going to hand it over to you and sort of ask questions along the way, and it's very casual, like a regular conversation normally is. And guys, if you want to, we haven't had time to go around and just say hi. So when you ask a question, just say hi, who you are, maybe talk about why you're interested in being here today, so we can get to know you guys as well. All right, over to you, Zach.
Cool. Do you want to do introductions of everybody here first, or you want me to introduce myself?
Why don't you start? Why don't you start introducing yourself?
I'm an artist and educator based in New York. I'm in Brooklyn right now at my studio. And I divide my time evenly doing three things. I do artwork, I do commercial work, and I do teaching. And in terms of teaching, I help run a school called the School for Poetic Computation. That's an experimental school based in New York. They're at MIT. And in terms of artwork, I do a lot of posts on Instagrams or daily sketches, and I do a lot of experimentation with code and trying to use code as an expressive medium. Commercial work, I work with clients and brands. The ideas that come from the artwork and translating them in the context of whatever commercial activity. And I find these three activities work really well together. For me, they're almost like three legs of a stool. And from one, like, things I might learn in the in my artistic practice and bring it to my commercial practice. I take things that I learned from working with companies and bringing it to the classroom, and I take the energy and try to bring that to my artistic practice. And I find these three things work really well together. I write software to make the work that I do, and I help develop a tool called Open Frameworks, which is a C++ tool for creative coding.
Thanks, Zach. It would be really interesting to just, if anyone around the room, we've got 30 people, so if anyone wants to ask Zach a question and talk about, maybe you can also describe the work that you've seen and then ask a question about it, because it would be great to know more about how Zach's work has influenced or even where you've seen his work.
Hey, Zach. This is
Hey.
Greg Crawford here. I'm an interaction designer.
Oh, Gray.
Hello? Sorry. Yeah, the voice
just
sort of cut out for a second.
Yeah. Say that again, Gray.
It looks like he froze.
Oh.
I guess I can ask a question. What kind of hardware are you enjoying using right now with the augmented reality?
Typically develop with iOS. So I've done some work with Android and in the Play Store, but I tend to developing on iOS, and for that, in that case, I'm using typically one of the latest iPad Pros, which is that's where I test a lot of ideas on. We have a bunch of phones, stuff on, but I typically use those old 15-inch MacBook Pros and the iPad. I really like iPad, for and my iPads I always use make a little handle so that I can hold it and run around the space testing things.
Can you, Zach, tell us about some of the latest things that you've been working on?
So some of the stuff that we've been doing recently involves AR with 3D, which I find quite interesting because it contains body segmentation on all devices that works with iPads and phones, but not AR kit runs on. But what it does is it gives you an image, which is both a segmentation mask. So basically, you can imagine just a black and white image where you have white pixels that represent a human body and black pixels that represent anything which is not a body, and also a depth image, which is very rough, but it's essentially an approximation. For every one of those white pixels, you can get a kind of a color which says, okay, this is how far in meters that pixel is away from the camera.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that it's basically doing in real time a kind of segmentation of people. Interesting because it's an algorithm that's running pretty fast. It's 2D information that we can then translate into 3D and try to put into space. So I've been doing a lot of experiments with that recently.
Okay.
Springtime, I have been experimenting with Spark AR.
Yeah.
Doing a lot of face masks and they have, Instagram has had a kind of beta program where you can make effects and share them, and it's really great thing, and then have people try it right away. Like one of the nice things about that as a platform. So when I'm working with iOS and making these tests, want to try it, and they say, is that an app? How can I try it? And it's really hard to share the work that you're making. And one of the things that I have really appreciated about Instagram is that you can make a filter, publish, make something in a day, publish it, it goes into review, and the next day, hundreds of people can try it. And I have found that to be really rewarding, just from a standpoint of sort of making stuff and putting it in people's hands right away, because oftentimes people are way more creative than I am, and I just love kind of putting something out there and seeing what other people do with it.
I mean, that's part of the philosophy of your work, isn't it? That you don't work alone, in the fact that you put everything out straight away to get feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I love publishing quickly, so oftentimes we're just like, and we might come up with an idea in the studio, try it, we might film it 3 or 4 different ways, pick one way that works and just post it really quickly. But the stuff's very unpolished. It's not, it really works, but we want to put it out there because it's helpful to see how people see it and to kind of see where we could take it.
So I'm going to ask one more question before I let someone else ask the next question. But since you have this like really close relationship with your audience, and you're sort of seeing how they're responding, and you're adjusting and changing your work, I assume, accordingly. Like, what is it that people are so fascinated with? What is the medium of AR particularly good at? I mean, we've got a very educated audience, but
sorry, can you ask that question again? The audio kind of.
Oh, did it? What is so great about AR that your audience responds to? I mean, what are they loving about AR?
Yeah, I think it's interesting about there is something quite interesting about like these sort of short video clips that are shot in different, and that you're adding this layer of surprise and a bit of ambiguity. Like it's, I think AR works really well in the medium where I is sort of posting on Instagram, because you make these very tiny videos, almost tiny movies, and they're like little investigations of space, little poems, or little with the person, with the space, and trying to add some layer of play on top of it. And I think that's one reason. So I've noticed when I post, I post a lot of different types of sketches on my Instagram, but I've noticed when I post AR, I get a lot more views because there's a curiosity factor. Like what is this? What's going to happen, or what's happening? Little film about space in a way.
Yeah, but so the big difference is that you now can play with space, and you can now create in space. And what does that give that no other creative medium does?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, the notion that you have with AR, you have 3D position data for a screen, a microphone, a camera, and a speaker.
Yeah.
Are in space, and that allows us to ask really interesting questions, like what is a camera? What is like we can start to investigate what those things are. Work that I do is very much oriented towards that, like trying to look at properties of this device and what sort of interesting questions can we ask now that we know where it is in space. The other thing that I find really interesting about AR is that you have to move in order to experience it.
Yeah.
That if you're standing still, it oftentimes looks quite flat and fake. A lot of it is this sort of choreography of camera movement that helps you understand be making content and walking backwards, making content and walking forwards. And a lot of times I feel like when we make some kind of sketch in the studio, we're almost like trying to figure out the cinematography. Like, how do you move in a way that's interesting?
So you're kind of saying there's this element of play in it. I remember like one of our conversations like almost a year ago, and you said, well, film is kind of passive, so you're there in emotion. And same with other mediums, but with AR you can get up and move around and interact, and that learning and that play element gets your brain moving and adds to an enjoyment and you can collaborate and yeah, I remember you talking about a piece you did for kids where you were helping them learn to play in space using AR.
Sorry, can you say that again? Part about kids?
Oh, you and Momo did an exhibition for children to play in space, and I remember you talking about the thing for them is play captures their mind and imagination and develops them more than just sitting watching something. And
yeah.
Can you hear me?
No, sorry, my headphones, it's like very scratchy. I don't know if it's scratchy to other people, but hearing everything, I could try swapping my headphones. Give me 1 second. Sorry, hold on.
All right.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay. Sorry to also take over, guys. I
Hey,
tend to do that, so feel free to just jump on me.
Can
Yeah?
Yeah, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I just switched headphones. I don't know if it was my headphones, but it was very scratchy, like I wasn't hearing every word. So
Okay.
feel free you can ask me a question, maybe by chat. I can hear now, so we can try doing it by voice, but you can also just ask it by chat.
Okay. Well, Craig, you wanted to ask a question. Maybe you can ask away.
All right. Hi, sorry about that. I think I accidentally disconnected my computer at the very beginning of my previous question, and I accidentally teleported. Hi. So I've seen you recently show some interesting explorations, incorporating a lot of the interesting. He's not hearing anything. Can you all hear me? Okay?
Now I am, but it's like you started to speak, and then I heard it like a thing, and then as soon as I typed that, I heard everything you said. So it's a little
interesting. I'm happy to just type it out then.
Okay. Zach, can you hear me now? It's a little frustrating. No. Oh.
So can people hear me okay if I
Yeah, you sound great.
Voice? Okay, then let's just do that. I'll answer questions. So how do you see the body tracking evolving with your exploration? Then one of the things that I fascinating is that with body tracking, you're starting to 2D add 2D information. So, things like computer vision, like, face tracking and that sort of stuff we can, we know really well, like we've been doing it for a long time. And so it's really interesting to say what happens when we put that in 3D. I think the idea of occlusion, of objects that move people, in front of people, around people, like that's quite interesting. I still feel like one of the challenges of the body segmentation is that it requires two people. So a lot of times I'm shooting videos that are just my hand because it's the only way that I can test, and or I'm filming somebody else and I'm asking them to do something and they don't really see it right away. So missing with it, or it's a challenge at the moment to sit, but I think it's going to be quite powerful in terms of creating more realistic experiences. And also, you know, AR just breaks. Like if you use it outside where there's multiple people, you know, you always have occlusion problems. You always have this problem of, you know, people thing that you do in AR being on top of the video feed. So the idea, even if it's quite basic, where we just have the silhouette of a person, that's a start. And as the device starts to know more about what's happening in space, it can do more complicated or interesting things. And I think there's a lot happening, you know, in the body segmentation is part of, I think, a larger picture, which are a bunch of different strategies for making AR more convincing and more sort of integrated in the world. Yeah, I mean, with AR, like a lot of times it's, so the question is about, you know, the sort of difference between using AR in 3D and then sort of putting it in 2D space, which is this 2D experience. And I find AR lends itself really well to sharing. Like if you think about face filters, but also the joy is in like making some kind of thing, like some content that is like similar to an animated GIF, like something that helps you express a complex emotion, and then you can put it out there in the world. And these videos are, they're very shareable. Like you make something and you can kind of put it out there, and this is a format that works, you know, well for it. I do love either sharing things that are right away. So I do, that's one reason why I've sort of gravitated towards Instagram filters, because and then immediately like show people some, you know, what it is, and then immediately people can try it, and that's quite nice. Apps. So for example, we have an app called Weird Type and another one called Weird Cuts, which is making something and then putting it in other people's hands. And that an ideal for me would be a way of working where I could share quickly and have other people try it right away. But Instagram is like the, you know, to publish the research. How do you handle negative abusive comments? Do you use them to somehow inform your work? That's a really good question. So I've actually been, my approach has sort of softened in a way. At the beginning, I was really like this sort of work in this posting almost as a form of diary entry, sharing it with people. But for me, it's a very personal thing. Like you're making, you know, you're making these kind of diary entries, and when people sort of give feedback, I like, right? If you're putting stuff out there and people are saying, oh, you should try this, you should try that, and I think people give feedback oftentimes because they care, like criticism or the work or reflect on it. It's also like the fact that you care about it. And it's taken me a while. Like I just respond when people say like, you should try this. I basically say, I have a few phrases that I use where I say like, you know, DJ does not take requests, because I just feel like I'm like the DJ and I'm making content. If you want to enjoy it. But you know, if you're a DJ, it's like kind of annoying if people are saying like, could you play this? Could you try this? Or I say, people say you should go this direction, and I sort of say like, I will go where the wind blows. And I've tried to do that just from a standpoint of like, I am sketching in order to understand myself and understand my own intuitions. But I'm still learning with how to deal with feedback and also try to have more, like, use humor as a way of responding. If people are really negative, like, try to engage or, you know, them in some ways. So yeah, that's something I'm still learning how to deal with. There was a question about sound. I missed it. It went kind of quickly. You want to ask the question again? I think it was something about SAT. I couldn't see it. I was speaking. I demoed a sound app at SAT Montreal last year. Yeah, AR sound app. Yeah, so I have some experiments with recording. Oh, thank you. I have some experiments with recording sound in space and then replaying it. It's just been very slow in our studio to make apps. Like, there's a lot of work that goes involved with actually an app, making all the assets for it, putting it in the app store, all that sort of stuff. And we, last year, that was really, you know, fun and successful. We did weird cuts with Google, and it was good. It was just really hard work on developing for Android. And like, the sound app is one that we would like to release soon. There's a few others, so it's definitely like in the works, but as a studio to try to work faster to basically have some sort of can sort of take our sketches and publish them in the form of tools for other people. It's just been hard. Like, if I could, I would. A chance. I'm starting now I just had some free time. I start to revisit Weird Type and have been looking at some kind of modifications and things that would improve on it. And I think some of those things may also free us up for making other apps that solve some of the bugs and some of the issues that we want to do on this app. Then we can app and look at some of the other apps and try to get them out. How is your work trying to do compared to, say, Snap? Sorry, Silke, can you ask that question again?
Just ask it. How you know, your apps are helping
I can't hear
us.
you.
Oh, okay.
Question on over chat.
Yeah.
I just didn't understand the question. Your apps are helping us create. How is that different from Snap and others? I mean,
And others.
oh, okay. Yeah, I think that I think that those you know, things like Snapchat filters, Instagram filters, etc., like they are being able to sort of play with AR and get a sense of what it is, and also for the general public. It's, in a lot of ways, I think it's really interesting for this thing, which has been around for a long time, marker-based AR, you know, since, you know, decade now or decade plus, this moment where AR is really hitting product, right? Where it's hitting like sort of mass market. People are experiencing AR, whether it's, you know, some sort of Snapchat filter, etc. And I think that, you know, one of the challenges as a creator is that those tools like they tend to be quite limited, and they lend themselves to a certain type of output. So if you use like Snapchat's tool in Studio or Spark AR, like they're really constrained. And I think there's a joy in trying to figure out within those constraints, how do you make something interesting? How do you push it? But, you can't, there's a whole category of things that you can't do. When you build apps using native tools or using ARKit or AirCore, that you can, offer up sort of much wider experiences for people. And for a reason. And I think that reason is, they're at a completely different scale. Like something like Spark AR is quite constrained because it has to work on a really wide array of devices and, in a completely different way than something like ARKit or AirCore does. Another question. I think I took a screenshot of it. How do you see more web-based AR experiences changing AR in the coming years? I'm not that familiar with web-based AR. I've seen I've seen some things recently where people put 3D models. Like I think Apple had an experience where, you could look at I don't know if it was the new computer or new monitor, and you sort of scrolled the page, and at the end you could like put that in the world. And I think that's really interesting to sort of integrate AR within, the context of browsing. Like we're already on our phones and we're already reading these articles or looking at things, and be able to have AR experiences that are built into that seems quite interesting experience with it. So I'm just not, I don't know how to answer that. How critical is open source in pushing the role for artists and designers in computing, and how can it be financially viable business model for practicing artists? It's a really good question. I mean, I think open source, so I'm a big advocate for open source in particular. I think about the notion that artists and designers are, when you're making art, you're performing research. The same way a company has a department for thinking of new products, that artists are kind of R&D department for humanity. Source is one way of publishing your research. Like, how do you take the things that you learn and tools? And I know in my own experience, things like with open frameworks, there's add-ons. People make add-ons, and it came out maybe 2 years ago, or I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago, or there wasn't, somebody made an ARKit add-on. So the moment when I got it and wanted to try it, there was some piece of code to get it away. And then as I was using it, I was making feedback and making changes, and other people have contributed changes. And as new features come out, that library of code gets updated. So, APIs change, new features get added. And we all have, I think about open source as a way of sort of raising the playing field, or raising the starting point, so that you can start scratch, but you can start from a place where, group of us, and it could be 5 people or 50 or 500, or, I don't know how many that are excited about a technology, a new material, a new approach. It's a place for us to communicate and share ideas. In terms of business, that's a tricky one, because open source, oftentimes requires a lot of time, and one thing I think always is to try to find ways for practice. So, I don't have an answer to that. For example, in my own work, I help create open frameworks. I help, create add-ons from time to time and contribute in one way or another. But I don't open source everything, because I don't know, developing sketches, I don't even know what they are yet. To me, they're like babies. Like, I don't know what they're going to become, and I don't feel very personally attached to them. And there's also some financial, they make a living. Like I make sketches on Instagram, but I also make an app and I sell it in the App Store, and I work for clients, and there's an aspect where you have to keep some part of your practice. You have to keep it sustainable, and that may involve having some things, taking like personal and which are important to you and keeping them private, and taking the things which are more platform based or helping other people create and making them open. Really good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for it. Of avatars, I don't. I mean, this is really this space is super interesting. I don't know what's Lil Michaela. I have to look that up. Sorry. Oh, actress. Oh, I've read about this. Yeah, drawn by a marketing team. Yeah, I no. I mean, I yeah, I do think like we are of social media. We're in this moment where to present yourself, and I've been really fascinated with, especially with the Instagram filters, is that there's such, it's, here's some beauty filters, or here's some things that sort of like silly effects, but it like quickly got really interesting, and a lot of artists, pushed it in different directions. And for me, I see a lot of people using using these filters as a way of really changing and presenting their identity, and really for me visually really interesting. So I'm quite fascinated with that. I don't have a lot of thoughts. Chatbots, Alexa, I don't have a lot of thoughts about that, to be honest. How do you feel about more and more new media art and websites being collected in galleries and cultural institutions? How do you see the collectability of spatial in the coming years? I mean, I'm excited when new media art is taken seriously as art. I think a lot of times, one of the challenges is it's been a hard medium in the art world, because a lot of times we're creating systems and not objects, and not creating things that are, like have a physical presence. And so it's hard to say website or buy an app, or what does that mean, or what does it mean to buy a piece of software which is designed to be duplicated, or buy a digital asset. Like, what does that mean? And that digital art breaks through in the art world, like I think that's great, and I think it's accepted as art. A lot of times I found that in my own practice, like we've come in, I have a piece at the MoMA, came in through the design department, right? Not through the art department, but like it's basically Paula Antonelli and design team at the MoMA that sort of opened up the back door and had really great design in the Elastic Mind, and a bunch of the exhibitions that have be exciting because they featured a lot of this community, but it feels like we've sort of come in through the back door, and the more that and sort of comes in through the art world, like that's really exciting. Does anybody have any technical questions?
What are some artists that you admire, Zach?
Sorry, say that again.
Um,
Oh, sorry, I can't hear anything. What are some artists that you admire? That's a really good question. Yeah. Yeah. What is your work for large printing works? Yeah, I'm a big, so in terms of artists that I admire, at the moment I'm really excited about, I follow a bunch of illustrators and I'm quite excited about illustration generally and sort of also kind of design practices. Are a few, I'm gonna just pull up and I'm sort of looking at designers. There's a designer named Braulio. It's just crazy. Like he makes really amazing posters, and a lot of times you'll find some sort of or like dirty spot of the sidewalk, and then he'll get inspired by it and turn it into a poster. And I love his work. There's an illustrator named Jocelyn Tsai, and she does really amazing drawings of bodies like being transformed. And you know, I find her work, yeah, just really poetic. And yeah, there's an artist named Chris Kim. She's a sound artist, but she was born deaf, and so her work is about her, like what is sound, but from the perspective of somebody who is deaf. And her work's just really fascinating. And okay, what was the other question? Oh, the large format printing. Oh, type out the names for the chat. Yeah, sure. Yeah, Braulio. And forgive me if I don't type these and Psi. And then in terms of the printing, so I've been doing a lot of print where I in the studio, it's a P800 Epson printer, 217 by 22 inches. And a lot of that, like making and selling prints. And for me, it's this really exciting thing because most of the work that I do is animation, but to try to find some and capture it and be able to, it's almost like being a wildlife photographer, like trying to find some kind of unique point, some kind of physical object. For that, it's basically making an image which is close to 100 dpi. So in my case, I'm using open frameworks. I make a large off-screen buffer. I draw to it. I save it out as pixels. I'm doing a large print right now for a collector, which is 5 foot, or it's basically a 6 foot circle, and that has involved, you know, way more complicated. You know, I have to render it as a I have to render it as a bunch of images. So I basically render it, you know, sort of piece by piece. It, you know, I have a giant TIFF image. It's about 4 gigabytes, and it's like the first time I've seen Photoshop just be like everything you do just takes seconds and minutes, and that's, for me, it's really exciting. The other thing that I had to figure out for that print is how to export 16-bit color. So typically I just have been doing everything at 8-bit color, which is pretty normal, but some feedback and I in bit. So that took a lot of sort of now if I do larger prints, I'll probably do it in the same way. For procedural, which using lots of variable tinkering, iterating, do you have live UX or is it rebuild and run iteration? That's a really good question. A little bit of both. So sometimes I will I will use oftentimes in my sketches, I'll just use the mouse, the X position and Y position of the mouse, and cook that up to a variable. Sometimes I'll use a GUI, so I'll add sliders or controllable. A lot of times there is a sort of back and forth. Well, I'll change a variable, compile it and run it. Sort of styles of programming is to use shaders, where I'm just changing the shader code and reloading the shader, every 30 frames or every 60 frames. So it's almost like live coding, where you can change a number and you hit save and you see and for that type of programming, that's really like more intuitive. Like you're just changing numbers and you're seeing a change right away. And the other way, if you're recompiling, that takes time. And one of the things that for me I find quite AR is that you're actually like putting it on a device. So you're not only are you compiling it, but you're like putting it on your phone and then unplugging your phone, like taking it around a space. And I have found that to be, it's just slower, like the process is slower. But yeah, I do a bit of both, either just changing numbers and recompiling them, or sort of hooking stuff up to a GUI. It's a second question, but it disappeared. Which work is almost IRL print, like graphical elements. Is there something potentially is there something that I intentionally do when I'm these sketches? A lot of times I start with a graphical idea. So I'll start with some sort of simple certain curve or a certain kind of line or a certain shape. I'll push it in different directions. So you can think about the sketches as almost shared DNA. And it might be something simple like, I'm going to make a shape that's only half circles, and they're connected in certain ways. And then I might try extruding that or revolving it. And I think about almost geometry as a form of glitch. Like there's different types of glitching, right? If you take images, you could glitch them. You remove some data from the header and then the JPEG will glitch in a certain way. Or you might say, like, let me try this thing and seeing what happens. And I sort of applying glitches to geometry. And that also plays out in the AR. I'm sort of saying, okay, if I take an image in space, like what are the various ways that I can glitch it? Like I could try these in different directions, or I could try cutting it and pushing them in 3D. And I think the process, for me, that creative process is like how to something and then push it and push it and push it in different directions. And challenge, like what's the smallest in order to make something new? Yeah, for me, that process, and I would say in terms of being intentional, oftentimes the intention in that initial thing, like what is that thing that I'm, and increasingly it's been very graphical, like some sort of graphical idea. What advice would you give to companies building AR tools? What would you like us to do and not do? I think advice for companies. I mean, one thing, and I have to give credit to Adobe, is like with artists and trying to understand perspective, like where could these tools be used in completely unexpected ways. Really interesting about approach, in particular to AR, but other technologies, is that they are trying to use it to or create sort of unexpected moments, and not really trying to, oftentimes it's not a practical or functional approach. Maybe more understand what the medium feels like. If there's any advice, I would say, have space at your table for artists. Like make space for artists. it can help you see, really for the things that you make. And then I would also say like open platforms, like anything you can do to open, make your platforms open for creative expression. For example, with Spark AR, they have opened it up in some way where, it's possible to make filters and to share it with people, and anything that you can do that, where you're really allowing other people to bring their creativity to the table, or take what you've done and extend it in new ways, like that's really powerful. Curious for your opinion about using machine learning in art. Do you have any interest in experimenting in this space? So that's right now, and a lot of my friends in the community have been getting into machine learning. I am interested in it in some capacity. So I'm interested in it, like the kind of problems that it can solve, to do with traditional techniques. So for example, human pose estimation, like trying from an image or a video, understanding where a human body is and where the points of a body are. That's an interesting problem that machine learning is techniques to help solve. That, there's a lot of creative applications for that. Like that's for AR, that's super interesting for artistic expression, and also for engaging with, and especially archival footage and archival media. I do think there's a tendency, and this is a tricky thing about machine learning, also about AR, there's a tendency to get sort of caught up in whatever the current trend is. And so, for example, like GANs are really popular right now, and there's a lot of people are making with GANs, and look of like, I'm going to take a bunch of images and train a GAN on them, and then animate between them, and sort of understand, create an animation with the latent space. And I think it's tricky as an artist, work with these technologies and understand what they are, at the core. At the moment with machine learning, there's a lot of hype with the situation where, there'll be like a new technique, and then everybody sort of runs in that direction. And there's a little bit of like, kind of everybody sort of following everybody or another. And then the other challenge is that, these technologies are being heavily promoted by a few big companies. A strong interest in, so for example, with machine learning, it's Google and Facebook and Amazon that are putting a ton of money behind now, but also behind the conversation around it. It's tricky as an artist, because you'll make work, like if you make work in the machine learning space, you got a lot of press and attention that you do. The press really wants to write about machine learning, and it's like this weird feedback loop where you get rewarded for making work within the technology. And I think it's hard, sometimes with that cycle, it's hard to think more critically about what it is. Like, what does this thing mean? How can you make work which is critical, outside of what the large companies and monopolies are doing? So, yeah. Coding and building 3D animations may seem like a parallel universe for classically trained graphic designers or artists. What are some easily transferable skills and common ground that might encourage more collaboration and learning across different disciplines? I think that, and Adobe probably have a lot to say about that, which is, how can you take, yeah, how can you take, things that you may be used to. So for example, like creating layers in Photoshop or in Illustrator, and like translate that into some sort of dimensional capacity. There are it's like whatever tools can be created that that help you quickly go from your sketches to seeing something in space like that. Interesting. I saw recently, and you have to forgive me because I don't know what the tool is, but I saw recently a workshop that a friend of mine did in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon, which was a game design workshop for kids, where the game design tool on photographs of napkin sketches. So they basically designed a game on paper. The way you might take a piece of paper and sort of design a board game, and then took photographs of the sketches, and then they became clickable, almost like, I wasn't Doodle AR, but I will, but it, to me, that when I saw that, I was like, okay, here's this way of translating something that is easy, like it's easy for us to design. Is it Torch? I don't know, but some sort of tool where it's easy to translate something that you're really good at, like, you're sketching on paper all the time, that could translate what you're good at into this new medium. Like, that's really powerful. So, like, for example, Doodle Lens is an example of that, where you could say, like, I'm going to start with a sketch on paper and then put it in AR. Have I played around with Quill? But that sounds, yeah, with Spatial.co. Other questions? Sketch and words become, oh, okay. Anyway, that. Yeah. What kind of commercial AR opportunities are you seeing today? I'm doing a lot of work in the fashion space. So in particular, there's a few brands that have reached out to me to do stuff like around one of the engagements is around Instagram filters, but in particular body. So Instagram Spark AR has some sort of concept of body segmentation. So I'm doing some work for them. There's another brand that has created some AR content for a product launch in fashion recently. But yeah, a lot of times I get engagements that are also modifications, where a company will say, we want to use weird type, but could you, change the font or change some style or change some behavior? Those, I mean, they're quite small engagements, but it's been quite cool to work with different brands. Any last word of advice for artists? So I was, yeah. Let me answer this one. What's that take on crypto art? Unfortunately, I have no concept about that. It's a really good question, but I haven't studied. So I just don't know. I've seen work in that, like around kind of using blockchain and digital assets, but I don't have anything to say about that. In terms of the question, like, what is my advice? I was at a conference and there was this designer named Nicholas Troxler. He's this old school poster designer, and he gave this amazing talk where he was showing all of these posters, basically his whole career, like all this work that he had done. And at the end, he said, you know, I just have advice for students always ask me like what's your advice, and he said I had 3 pieces of advice, which is experiment, experiment, experiment. And for me that's the same for anybody. It's just try to get up some sort of feedback loop where you can just keep experimenting. You make, the more you learn about what you're making.
I'm going to try and talk. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
We're down to 21, so that's okay.
Yeah.
So that's maybe why.
Yeah.
So Zach, it's 10. I just want to thank you so much for joining us and just dropping in and answering all our questions and inspiring us. So we will be posting some of your quotes out. We'll check with you first. Everyone, please join in the online discussion on Twitter as well. We have some flying person behind you.
What is that?
That is okay. That's new. That's
Yeah.
hilarious. Welcome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
last meeting, everyone hung around for 10 more minutes or so, and you're very welcome to hang around a bit more. And we just all kind of drew in the air and talked about some crazy ideas, and it was far less formal than this informal meeting, and
Yeah.
things like this happened. So I think maybe Tonic is starting the party now.
Okay, cool. That was really funny. Sorry about the audio. I just it got
not,
really got a little
this this issue with the sound we'll have to work out afterwards. We haven't had it like this before, and I'm so pleased Greg is here and Liv, who've been supporting us through this.
Yeah.
It is a new platform. We want to all meet as avatars.
Yeah.
And we're the biggest group they have, so we're their guinea pigs.
Yeah, I agree. Somebody just suggested a chat history. One of the challenges I had is the chat.
Yeah.
I would find I would be answering a question, and then it would but they would all disappear really quickly. So
good advice. Good
maybe
advice.
there's also a way to do sound like in a different, like occasionally I'll do like call where the sound will be on a different platform. Screen share on one platform and sound on another, but maybe if the sound
it's still
is a problem, there could be sort of a backup platform.
I wonder if it's a bandwidth, not the sound. I mean, I know you had problems with your mics, but besides the fact that the sound was cutting out for me a lot during the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's hear part of what people. To me, it seems like a buffering issue where I would hear like the start of a question and then I would get all choppy, and then I would hear like, I would hear another chunk of the question. So it feels like some sort of buffering thing.
Yeah, we haven't had it like this that all the questions have to be typed out, which it's not ideal, but at least we have that. So
yeah. I mean, if we could be all speaking, then it could be a little bit more like a conversation.
It's more conducive for a conversation. You ended up having to speak a lot more, so thank you for picking up the slack.
No problem. Yeah, but this is cool. I've never been in this, so quite interesting.
Yeah, we wanted to try to push this because we are talking about new technologies and we should be experiencing it as we share it. But Hubs is the easiest for everyone to enter who have no experience. And it's the easiest to use from all of them and has some fun things like drawing. But yeah, it's kind of new and there's bugs.
Yeah, it's cool. The spatial audio is cool. So when I first entered and I was moving around, I actually knew sort of where to look.
Yeah.
You can kind of hear them behind you, or
do you want to hang around for 10 minutes? Maybe we can get the disco ball back.
Yeah, I can hang out. I need to step
You need to
away
go.
for just a second.
Okay.
But I just need to step away for a minute. But I'll be back in a minute. So
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm happy to see what the room looks like with the disco ball. I just need to drink a glass of
Have
water.
a glass of water and come back. And I'd love to hear what other people are working on who in the room. We've still got 17 people. I'm getting the disco ball.